Many of you might know that, because I mentioned earlier, but we're going through a series, God's Design for Sexuality and for Humanity and such. We're going to take a break this week, and since we're doing that, I'm going to talk about fishing. And yes, so if you don't know me, once again, my name's Stephen. I'm our family minister here, and I really like the outdoors. And when I tell people that, they go, "Oh yeah, I do too." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, great. We should go hiking or go like fishing or hunting or whatever together." They're like, "Oh yeah." And then fall rolls around and they do their one outing that they do a year. And then in December, I'm like, "Yeah, it was so cold, but I waded through the creek and I fished and I didn't catch a thing." And they're like, "Steven, it's 31 degrees outside. What are you doing?" I'm like, "I told you I love fishing." And I really love fishing a lot. I love hunting. I love the outdoors. I have some evidence. Here's a little Alaska trip I did. I love fishing. I love going. I love traveling to do it. God created a beautiful world of experiencing it. Caught some salmon and such. I also love native fishing. I have a picture of a bass. And these, I'm going to talk about two of my favorite species, but really just one of them. This is a Guadalupe bass. It's very special. It's only found in the state of Texas. It's very special for us. Much smaller than like if you're a fisherman and you fish before you catch those really big largemouth. I think the world record for this is like 5 or 6 pounds. And like that's most people's personal best or smaller than their personal best largemouth. But they were made for these Texas streams. I love them. The last one I want to put up is a Rio Grande cichlid. And I'm going to leave that one there for a minute. I made it so that I can stand over here and y'all can see it. Yeah, they're so pretty, right? Yeah, give some shout out to the Rio Grande cichlid. Now, if you're like, "What's this dude? Can the pastor please come back?" I'm getting to the Bible. I promise you this is going to help it. But as I was studying through and just doing more research on what we're talking about, I realized that I had to end to talk about one of my favorite pastimes to do. So this fish, the Rio Grande cichlid, is the only native cichlid in the continental U.S. It's really special. Cichlids are like a tropical fish. They're really popular in aquariums or like fish tanks. So if you've gone to the dentist, you've probably seen a species of cichlid. They're really pretty. Like this is even one of like the least colorful cichlids that there is. They're very pretty, very colorful. So they're popular for fish tanks and stuff. With that being said, they're tropical fish. Or do we live in a tropical environment here? No, not really. But for some reason, the Rio Grande cichlid, which originally was just on like the border of Texas, over the past 30, 40 years, worked its way up streams and creeks. And even more special is where I fish, which is like between Pflugerville and Georgetown, is like as far north as they get. So they only exist in about 15, 20 streams in the state. They're the only, these are such special fish. As you can see, that's my beautiful, I've been told I should be a hand model. Do you agree? It's only part of it. There's my hand there. It's not a big fish. This is actually one of the top 3 biggest I've ever caught. They can get about 11 inches long, and at that point, they look like a dinner plate. Like they're about the size like what you would, put your spaghetti on. But that's still not very big. But if you ever like, "Oh, Steven likes fishing," if you talk to me, sure, I'll talk about the cool salmon up in Alaska, and I'll talk about trout fishing in the mountains of Colorado, and I'll talk about, fishing down at the coast. I'll talk about all that. But these and that Guadalupe bass, I'll talk your ear off. I've probably already done it if you've talked to me anything about the outdoors. These fish are so neat and so special. Let me see. Is there anything else that I wanted to share with you all about them? No. So why am I talking about it? I'll quit. I know most of you don't care. Just leave it up. Oh, that's fine. You can take it off. No, it's fine. Just kidding. So why am I talking about the Rio Grande cichlid? Well, today we're going to look at 2 stories out of John. It's where John feeds 5,000 with a couple fish and some bread. And at the end of John, where he says, "Throw your net on the other side," and they catch all the fish. 2 stories you may be really familiar with. 2 stories I was very familiar with. But not until recently did I realize that they were a mirror of each other. I never put the 2 together because they're so far apart in the book of John. I never sat and read them both at one time. I never read through the entirety of John in one sitting until a few months ago. I'd always broken it up. The fish they were catching, many of you probably don't order when you go to a restaurant, is a tilapia. Did y'all know that? Tilapia is what would have been found in the Sea of Galilee. So they were catching tilapia. You know what tilapia are? They're a cichlid. Oh yeah, so I was doing some research because I was like, how big were these fish? All this sort of stuff, and it was like, oh, like St. Peter's fish are tilapia, which are a member of the cichlid family. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I knew there was a reason I like catching cichlids the most, and it's because that's what Jesus ate. Amen. I knew there was a reason, but yeah, I was like, man, this is so cool. That makes my favorite fish even cooler. Man, I love it. And like I said, I was fishing last night. Like Liv went to bed and I just got some new fly line because my old fly line was incredibly old. And I was like, it's super rainy and the creeks are like flowing and they're like the color of chocolate milk, but I've got to go out. Like I'm telling you, I love it. And I love cichlids, and it's because Jesus loves cichlids. Amen? Amen. Yeah, no. Okay, yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And before we get into it, I want to give a little bit intro to the book of John. And I want to also share with y'all why I'm going to move this back to the middle now that picture's gone, why I'm so stoked about John. So a friend of mine recently asked me to speak at his, and I mentioned this before to y'all. I've mentioned this whole like sermon I gave in like 30 seconds while leading worship a couple months ago. So if you were here, y'all can head out, go get lunch, like whatever, it's fine. So my friend asked me to come speak at his high school retreat for his student ministry. So me, like 4 adults and 15, 20-ish high school students sat down around a table and from 9 p.m. until 12:30 p.m. read the book of John. Everybody had a paragraph, and we just went around. We kept reading and reading. Man, that was so cool, y'all. I just want to say, if you don't read whole books of the Bible, like maybe ask some friends, maybe at your CG. It would take a while. Maybe pick a smaller book, but do it with the big books too. Like it was so incredible sitting and just reading, and all of the individual stories just like immediately just folded together. It was so cool doing that. So before we do that, I want to give you all a bit of a background of the book of John. This will be brief, but I think it helps us understand. John was the last gospel to be written of our gospels. So John at this point was old. Like some say, like he was way later in life. And what that means is John really had a lot of time to either A, forget, or B, think about what was important to put in his gospel. In chapter 20, verses 30 through 31, he tells why he wrote the book. And it says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Elsewhere in the book of John, he says that if we were to write down every miracle, the whole world could not contain the books. We wouldn't have enough chapters, we wouldn't have enough pages, there wouldn't be enough trees to chop down to write the miracles of Jesus. He's thought about these. You know how many miracles? And the students actually questioned me this. They were like, why doesn't the resurrection of Jesus count as a miracle? Because it is one. And I was like, that's a really good point. That is a miracle. But like, it was a miracle he performed for himself, for others. Aside from the resurrection, you know how many miracles are in the book of John? 7. Thank you, Caden. Just like a rock star in the back. I loved it, dude. You were like, okay, anyway, sorry, move on. There are 7. You know how many I am statements there are in the book of John? 7. Yeah. Yeah, it was a great guess. Yeah, you're right. You had a 98% chance of knocking that one in the park, and you did. See, John was an old guy. He said if he wanted to write all the miracles, he could tear down all the trees and not have enough paper. But he only put 7. And that must mean that those 7 are really important to the purpose of A, believing in Jesus Christ, and that through believing you can have life. So if you're sitting down and you're like, man, I'm having a hard time believing that Jesus is God and I want to find life in him, this isn't the book that's recommended. Like a book like Matthew is one that's recommended to maybe do that with. Man, I encourage you, sit down with John, because John really thought for years, for decades, and whenever he wrote his gospel and the Spirit wrote the gospel through John, these things were very important. He believed that these 7 I am statements and these 7 miracles, included with other teaching of Jesus, were the pinnacle of believing that he is Lord and that through believing in him, having life. So this is such a cool book. I want to encourage you. Like before we even get going, I was being paid like it was my job to be there. But y'all, I sat at that table and the youth pastor was like, hey, like I know like you've got a lot going on tomorrow. You're preaching like 6 sermons. Do you like want to go to sleep? I was like, no, man, this is great. Like sit down, read a book, read the whole thing, grab some friends, switch chapters, do it. That's my advice for y'all here. So that's where we land, but like I said, I want to talk about two. One being when Jesus fed the 5,000, and the other being at the end of the book when he says, cast your net on the other side, and they catch all of these fish. Before we do, I need an artistic volunteer who doesn't mind being on the stream. You don't have to draw a lot, but I'm going to have you come up a couple times to draw some stuff on this board. Who does it want to be? It's not me. Caden? All right, come up here. Yeah, let's go, Caden. I'm going to do one thing for you. I'm going to steal your thunder. That's your dividing line. All right, with this, that was a dividing line. You do it with the blue. Yep, that's in frame. I don't know if they'll see it on the stream. It's kind of bright. Can you write John 6 up here on this one for us? And like I said, I'm going to have you go back and forth, so I hope you're okay with getting a little bit of workout. Can you write John 21 on the other one? No, round of applause. All right, you can go sit down. I'll call you back up in a second. I'll call you back up. It's fine. It's fine. So if you have your Bible, turn there. If not, it's on the screen. Or search it up on your phone. Internet's a crazy place. It has everything. We're going to be in John chapter 6 first. And this is a story where Jesus feeds the 5,000 men plus all of the women and children who are there with them. And it's going to be verses 5 to 13 is what we're going to read together. And then I'm going to call Caden back up here a couple more times, and then we'll read the other one. So once again, this is John chapter 6, starting in verse 5. So you're at the end of your Bible if you're not super familiar with the spot. I like how I promoted, like, we need to sit down and read the whole book at once. And I'm like, but I'm going to pull two little stories out. But that's fine. I told you to go do it later. So, yeah. Should I read the whole thing? Book of John, starting right now? Y'all cool with being here till like 5? So we're going to go for it. Okay. So in John chapter 6, verse 5, because that's where we're going to start, through 13, it says this, and lifting up his eyes, then seeing the large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. It's a funny detail. There was grass. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the barley loaves left by those who had eaten. All right, Cade, make your way back up. I'm going to need you to take the brown, and we're on John 6. So take like about half the section, and I need you to draw some sort of representation of 5,000 people. If you need to give us a scale, like one person equals 100, one person equals 200 people, then draw a bunch of stick people, I'll let you have your artistic creativity. So yeah, somewhere in this phase, you're regretting signing up for this job. That's too bad. Anybody do you want to phone a friend, or are you in? All right, let's go for it. Give us a scale, like let us know how it is, and then just represent 5,000 people. But please don't draw one stick figure and say 1 equals 5,000, because that won't help us later on. Oh, that's not a very dark marker. When do you turn it sideways? Okay, yeah. Here, I'm gonna make you restart. Okay, that works. Go for it. All right. So Jesus sees and cares about these people's tangible needs. First, we're just going to look at each story. We'll talk about them together here in a second. So Jesus looks out, and there's this crowd of 5,000 men plus the women and children coming. Like, that's a mob if I've ever heard one. And like I said, it's kind of funny. Conveniently, there was some grass there. So he was like, hey, y'all all sit down. We're going to have a picnic. And that's where we get this story. Now, Philip, Jesus asks and says in verse 6, or in verse 5, where are we to buy some bread so that these people may eat? And he said this to test them because he knew. So Philip looks up. Is that your representation? Keep going. I'm gonna make you keep going. Keep on going. Keep going for a little bit. Where was I? Now that I've harassed you, I don't know. Okay, yeah. So, right. Philip doubted, and he was like, I mean, it'd take 200 denarii. Like that's nearly a year of a person's wage, and people would just snack. Like we don't have enough to give. Like we can't do that. But what did Andrew do? Yeah, he tried. He said, hey, there's this boy over here, which was probably hard to spot in a sea of thousands of people. But he said, hey, there's this boy. So he tried, even though it was like silly, right? Like that's a stupid, honestly, it's a stupid request. It's like, hey, I've got this little boy here. He's got 2 fish. And I'm sure that Philip was like, did you not just hear me? Like, we need 200 denarii worth. Like, we even need, like, that's 2. And even Andrew, then, he doubted himself too. And at the end of 7, he says, nope, sorry. And at the end of 9, but what are they for so many? I'll let you stop there, because now I need you to grab the blue. And we hear that, so then to Jesus was brought 2 fish and 5 loaves. So can you draw us 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread? Starting with the bread. Okay, I was like, that's not a fish. I don't know what you're going for there. That's Olivia's favorite thing for us to draw for is fish. So we draw fish all the time, and I knew that wasn't it. So there's our 5 loaves of bread at the cross-section view. And then we've got, there we go, there's a fish. All right, now you can go to your seat. It's going to be a minute. You get a break. Round of applause, round of applause. Great job, great job. So Andrew brought what he could find, even though it seemed silly. Now, what type of fish were these again? Yeah, tilapia, which are a type of cichlid. That's right, my local Texas native fish. Have you ever had tilapia, like where it was the whole fish with like the eye on it and stuff? How big was it? Yeah, they're about yay big. They're much bigger than my Rio Grande cichlid. The average big tilapia is 4 to 6 pounds. Because I'm a fishing nerd, the world record was 10.7 pounds, and it was caught in Florida. So there's your fun fact about tilapia. But the average would have been about 4 to 6 pounds. So even if this kid was catching like just absolute slab tilapia, maybe they were 8 or 9 pounds. That's still not that big of a fish, especially once you take the actual meat off of the fish. So he brings these 2 fish and these 5 loaves for our wonderful representation of 10,000 people, right? We have then before the disciples this fish, and he says, what are they, Andrew says, but what are they for so many? He's stating the obvious, right? Like how, like Jesus says, hey, like how are we going to feed these people? And man, Philip's response is, we can't. And Andrew goes, well, I've got this. He's just stating the obvious, like, but how is this going to help? This doesn't solve our problem. This does nothing for what we're trying to achieve. But Jesus meets the needs with what he was given. Does Jesus produce the fish or the bread here originally? Is he the source of the fish or the bread in this story? No, the little boy was. But he took this little boy's gift and he fed thousands. Now, I love this because Jesus could have done whatever he wanted, right? Whenever we look at the story where he was being tempted after he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, what does Satan tell him to do? What was the first temptation? Yeah, turn this rock into some bread. And I believe he tempted that because Jesus could have done it. Scripture tells us that Jesus was there in the beginning. He created in the beginning. If he made rocks, he can turn them into fish if he wants. Jesus could have done anything to feed these 5,000, but he turns to Philip and he goes, hey, how are we going to do this? He returns to his disciples, to regular people like us, and he puts it on them. And then Andrew does whatever he can. Hey, this little boy has some fish. And Jesus meets the need. And as we read in House, probably many of us know, he fed thousands. So much so that what was left over? Do y'all remember how much of what food was left over? 12 baskets of what? Bread. Was there any fish? It doesn't say. It says that they gathered up 12 different baskets of bread left over. So we were sitting, at this point, it's not 10:30, 11 o'clock. I was sitting with his teenagers. We read that, and we keep going. We took a 15-minute recess at 10 because if you could imagine, a 15-year-old kid trying to read for 3.5 hours straight was not going too well. So we gave him a little bit of break, but then we jumped back in, and eventually we're closing out the book all the way over at John chapter 21. So you can flip yourselves there too. And we're going to read verses 1 through 14. And in this story, this is the last time that John notes that the resurrected Jesus encounters his disciples before he ascends into heaven. Once again, we don't have all of the stories. Like in other Gospels, we get like, oh, Jesus there, he appeared, and then he ascended in front of their eyes. That's not in the book of John. For whatever reason, John didn't care to include that. But after years and years of like very meticulous thinking over what he should include, this is the very last interaction that we get with Jesus and his disciples after he had died on the cross, resurrected, and before he ascended into heaven. And we get this story in John chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. It says this. Yeah, good. Okay. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered him, no. So he said to them, cast a net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, but about 100 yards off. And when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although they were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. All right. Come on back up, Caden. I got more tasks for you. You got on your other side. Now we're in John 21. How many disciples were there? You'd have to do math. It doesn't say, I don't think. Do math there at the beginning, verses like 1 through 3, 1 and 2.
13 maybe?
Who are here? No, it says the names.
Oh, okay.
And then plus 2 others.
7.
Is there 7? I had 5. Did I not pay attention? Is it 5? Can I have someone else count? Because now I'm really doubting myself. 5? Okay, we're going to go with 5. That's what I've written down, and I heard 2 5s, so I'm going to take it. Can you draw us 5 people? Do it down here with the brown, so that it mimics our lovely 5,000 to 10,000 people down here. So draw us 5 little people. You're a lot more artistic when there's less to do. We got ourselves 5 people here. This one won't take as long, so I'm going to let you sit down and call you back up here again in a second. And round of applause. Let's give Caden. All right, so we have some skilled fishers here. I was always confused as a kid. Y'all know these seas were lakes, right? It's freshwater. I didn't know that. Y'all are literally all smarter than I am if y'all want to come up here. This is freshwater. So like when I read sea, I think like I imagine like going out, because it's all that I know as far as saltwater, going out into the Gulf of Texas, right? And it's like, man, I did one fishing trip there, and it was both amazing and miserable. It was 13 hours long. 10 of those were boating to the coast of Mexico to catch 2 fish per person and back, and only 2 of those were actual fishing. Now, it was a lot of fun, but it was pretty chaotic. So my picture of sea is going for hours and hours with absolutely nothing in sight. Once you get past like the first hour, beach is invisible and you're just in the middle of nowhere. You don't know if you're going to your death or what's happening. But it's important remembering that that's not the seas that they were on. There were very large lakes. For comparison, I looked it up. The Sea of Galilee is 41,000 acres. Lake Travis is 18,000. I see Lake Travis as a really small lake, like when I think of lakes. Not really, really tiny, but it's a smaller lake. So when we think of Sea of Galilee, we think of the other seas. This is not the Sea of Galilee. It says they are the Sea of Tiberias. But these are large lakes, very big lakes, but not the can't see to the other side, impossible distance kind of seas. All right, I just want to clarify that because I was rather confused. So these people, do they know how to fish? These disciples. Right, yes. I love it. You're just going with like, I'm setting them up on a tee and you're there every time, Lauren. It's great. These people are very skilled fishermen. I like to consider myself skilled when it comes to fishing in rivers and streams. I like it. I do it a lot. I hope I'm good at it. I consider myself to be good at that. So when these people go out on the lake, which I am horrible at, don't ask me to take you on a lake and fish. We won't catch anything. These guys did that for a living. They knew how to catch fish. And it said they fished all night long. Anybody know why they fished during the night? Fish are out? Maybe. Not really. Sorry, Jared. No, it wasn't for fear of that. Where are they geographically? It's hot as mess during the day. You want to be on a boat with the water reflecting light on you for 10 hours? No, that's hot. So the fishermen by trade, the people who did it, like they fished at night. So at night, that's when all the boats would head out. They would all go catch fish. Not because the fish necessarily ate then. In fact, cichlids, they are like middle heat of the day type fish, and tilapia are as well. So it wasn't like for catching fish. It was because it was too hot to be outside. And even at night it was hot because we heard that he had to put his cloak on because he had to strip the outer cloak off because he was hot, even in the middle of the night fishing. Now, are there any people who've ever fished before? Can you raise hands? Okay, a handful. Have you ever heard the saying, better to have a bad day of fishing? Man, I am just constantly reminded how country I am. You know it. No, I guess that's maybe one end. What I've always heard is better a bad day of fishing than a good day at work. I mean, ain't it right? Better a bad day of fishing than a good day at work. Ain't that right, Bill? That's what I always grew up hearing. That's not the case for these guys, though. Fishing was work. So a bad day of fishing is a bad day at work. So it's like, for me, I can go out. I cannot eat anything all day long, wade, waist deep through water for 10 miles, not see a fish. And I'll come home and I'm like, Sarah, I have to tell you about it. Man, I was walking and there was a deer. And it's like, I love it. For these guys to be out all night long and not catch anything, that's not good. 2, did all of them initially want to go fishing? No. Who was it? I started his name. It wasn't Peter, I don't think. No? Yeah, Andrew, yes. Simon, wait, what? It was Peter. Oh, man. Let me backspace this. I'm going to go ahead and correct that just so y'all can experience. Peter did, and then the other guys said, we'll come. Should I leave? Should I just... Man, I know how embarrassed Peter is for this. Inviting someone to come fishing with me is like the scariest thing ever. Because it's like, man, what if we don't catch something? I remember we had, they no longer attend Austin Life. He's actually, I can't remember where they are, but they were friends. Their friend, man, I don't know. Anyway, his name's Will. He's a missionary in some other country now. But he was like, hey, I've always wanted to go fly fishing. Can you take me? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. We got to the creek, and it was like how it was yesterday for me. The thing was 3 feet higher than it was supposed to be. It was flowing real fast, and it was chocolate milk. And I was like, I don't know if it's going to work. He said, I don't care. Let's go. So we're stepping in this water. You can't see anything. We saw one gar. We didn't catch a thing. And I get to the end. I'm like, oh, I'm so worried. Like going and getting skunked, the term to use for it, or goose egged because you got 0. It's the worst. Lucky for me, that day, Will was like, man, that was so awesome. When can we go next time? And it was great. But I can feel the secondhand embarrassment from Peter whenever they went and didn't catch anything. And see, their fishing is very different than what I'm used to as well. See, fly fishing is a lot of work. Like, it's way harder than just like tossing a line. You've got to work. You've got to get your lure out or your fly out there. But the way they did it and the way you catch these tilapia is they school together in the depths and eat the vegetation. So they throw a net and they let it sink. And what happens after it sinks? You got to pull it back up. So these guys are on this boat all night long, throwing a net, pulling it up, throwing a net, pulling it up, rowing to the next spot, throwing a net, pulling it up, throwing a net all night long with absolutely nothing to show for it. Man, this is way much harder work than I ever did, and I can feel Peter's embarrassment here. Also, since tilapia are bottom feeders, that's why most people don't like to eat them. They're like, oh, they're kind of gross. Like, kind of gross little fish. Anyway, so yeah, these guys were doing super hard work, but Jesus there on the shore in the morning, he guides them. And what does he tell them to do? Throw it on the other side of the boat. Jesus, if we would have thought about that all night long. We've been cast in for 10 hours straight on the left side of the boat. So dumb. You know? No, like these guys, obviously, they're skilled fishermen. They know the spots on this lake. They would have known where to go. They're casting everywhere it's not working. But Jesus says cast on the right side, so they do, which is also weird. The fact they didn't know this was Jesus, and some dude from shore is like, cast on the other side. And they go, okay, and they throw it, right? It seems kind of strange they took the advice, but they did. I guess at that point, you're desperate. And Peter, once again, he's probably just like, please, just one fish in the net so that it feels worth it. And it says that when they do, I'm going back up here, Caden, we got the almost the last bit for you, that they catch 153 large fish. You can like circle. If fish needs to be little circles for speed, I would love to see 153.
Just gonna draw a net with a lot of fish.
Yeah, throw it. Yeah, you can be creative, man, all you want. But we have Jesus here on the shore. He says, cast on the other side. And it says they pull in a net. Now, it doesn't say 153 at first. That's later on. But eventually, when Jesus says, hey, go get some of the fish, they pull the boat up. They get the net off the boat. And it says they catch 153 large fish. Now, I will say, catching a lot of tilapia one place is not uncommon. In fact, the reason tilapia are really popular in restaurants is they are one of the only fish that are in a purely comfortable environment when they're farmed. They want to be side by side, crammed together in dirty, gross water that they can sift through the mud and eat out of. So in these lakes, oftentimes when they found fish, they found a lot of them clustered together. So the simplicity of there being a lot of fish in one spot, that's not like, oh, that's unheard of. Like, I've never seen that before. Like, we've all seen the videos. This is different, but in the ocean where they like pull in the net and it's like there's a seal on the inside that's like gorging itself on thousands and thousands of bait fish. Like, you could go out here on the lakes, cast a net, and catch a lot of these tilapia at one time. Naturally, whenever, especially at night when they aren't active and they aren't out, perfect. Hey, 1 second. Hang out. It's too soon. Oh yeah, it's nighttime. They're not eating. They're not active. Yeah, they're just going to cram together and chill. But what is uncommon is their boats weren't big. Think about like one of these they're throwing right here. They've been throwing all night. They throw it here, pull up, and they don't catch anything. Jesus goes, throw it on the other side. They throw right here, and they catch 153. That's kind of weird. If there's 153 here, they should have caught something in the other cast. So there is something miraculous about this. It's not that it's just the super common easy thing. Also, what size did it say all 153 were? Large. At night, they're going to be clustered up in families. Like every single tilapia is going to be, you're going to have a bunch of little bitty tiny, like you're going to be tossing a bunch back. No, it says all 153 were large. And then I think I'm going to skip forward. No, they make it to shore. And let me ask you all this question. Who provides the food for them here? In the last story, it was the boy. He had the food. Jesus multiplied it and provided it. When they get to shore, who is providing food? Jesus. So can you draw an extra person here? Because now there's a sixth. In brown, please. Yeah, right here. Draw some person in brown. You'll use a blue in a second. Draw us one person in brown. So there's the sixth. You made him a little bit bigger because he's Jesus. And some importance. Okay. And then now with the blue on the side, maybe draw like a little fire and draw just some fish and bread. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter exactly. But just draw some fish and bread there. I love it. It's a great fire. Look at us in the Boy Scout building, just like, I hope they would pass us for some fish. I love it. Perfect. You're done for the day. Well, let's thank Caden. Wonderful job. I love it. I love it. So great. Yes. So they get to shore, and Jesus is there with a fire and bread and fish already cooking. But what does he tell them? Before they sit down and eat, what does he ask them to do? Bring me some more fish. We'll get there in a minute. But when we looked at the other story, this story, a boy had the food, and Jesus multiplied it to provide for everybody. But over here, Jesus had food, and he asked for the disciples for some of their food. So we'll get to that in a minute, but I want you all to see that dichotomy, that separation of those two things. And then they sat down and they ate. So I want us, those are the stories as an overview. I want to talk about what the Lord revealed to me and why I'm so excited and why I push, hey, sit down and read a whole book. Because I have never once put these two stories together. I've read about a miracle, feeding 5,000, and then I've heard this, and it's oh, it's so cool, Jesus, and he led them, and he got in the cross, and it was great. But I've never combined the two, and I've never realized that what John was doing through this narrative was combining these two things. So these disciples would have remembered this feeding. How could they forget it? It was one of the 7 after years that John wrote down. And in other Gospels, we actually find that Jesus did this multiple times. It wasn't a one-time thing. We get a story of Jesus feeding 4,000 people. And in that same gospel, Jesus fed the 5,000. So we know he did this more than one time. This miraculous feeding is something that they would have remembered. But this, once again, is the last encounter that John mentions of the resurrected Jesus with his disciples. And he uses this to directly impact the ministry that they would be put on. So, I grew up small town Baptist church, and I'm going to be a good Baptist. I got 5 points for you today. A few of you will get that joke, some of you don't. I've got 5 things, and it just conveniently landed that way, but I'm going to be a good Baptist roots. I'll have to call my old school pastors and let them know they should be proud. I learned from them. That this, I think, shows us when we look at the totality of the book of John. And what were the 2 purposes John wrote the book again? So that you can what? Yeah, believe Jesus and have life. This is all about believing in Jesus and having life in him. So the first thing that I want us to look at is that although these guys were highly trained and skilled fishermen, they worked their tails off all night long and were unable to produce any catch. See, with these stories, Jesus didn't care about food. We'll talk in a second about what he said after this story, about who he said he was. Jesus wasn't talking about fish and bread in these stories. Guys, even some of the best theologians, pastors, podcasters, whoever you name it, sometimes praying, fasting, seeking the Lord, and it feels like still just coming up with nothing. Have y'all been there? I feel like I'm just going in, but I don't have any catch to prove it. I don't have any fish to be oh, yes, Lord, you provided for me. I feel like I'm praying, I'm seeking, I'm fasting, and I don't have answers for the things that I'm praying and seeking and fasting for. We see here, though, that their work was not in vain. So the second thing is that Jesus guides them to fruitful labor. So if y'all notice, Jesus didn't go hey, what are y'all doing casting on that side? Have you lost your minds? Y'all are ridiculous. You're not doing things right. He didn't cast out complaints against the fishermen. He just goes, hey, have you caught anything yet? No. I cast on the other side. And when they do, Jesus provides for them. Now, where did I say that those tilapia reside in the lake, especially on a cool night? They're way down there. So Jesus provided them. Did they have to work? Yeah, they did. You could argue that for this one, there wasn't really much work needed. Now, a disciple did have to go find a boy and say, here are 2 fish, but they didn't catch the fish, they didn't make the bread, and they didn't multiply it. Jesus did all of the work of this miracle. But with this one over here, he says, hey, just cast on the other side, but know that you've got to fight. It said that they couldn't even pull the fish out of the water into their boat in fear of tipping. There's so many fish. So we see here that Jesus provides, and he doesn't look at them as saying, you guys are skilled fishermen. You should have caught fish by now. I'm disappointed in you. Why are you over here with no fish after days full of labor? He says, no, cast on the other side. I'm certain that there are times in our life where we feel like we're working, we're praying, we're doing everything right, and we should be receiving some reward from the Lord, but he might be saying, hey, listen to my voice. Let me guide you. Cast your net on the other side. Their hard work was not in vain. And did he just provide for their immediate need? No, they caught how many fish? 153. I heard it whispered, heard of there too. They caught 153 fish. Our third thing is that Jesus provides, but also so do we. So let's look at our chart. So once again, who provided this? A boy did. And then who provided over here? Jesus and the disciples, right? Okay. If we look at that's in chapter 21, verse 9, just for you, it says that when they got to land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. But then in 10, Jesus said, bring to them some of the fish that you have caught. So in the 5,000, Jesus took the gift of boys, bread and fish, and provided for all of these people. But in our story here at the end, we have the fish that he guided them to, but the disciples labored for, being a part of Jesus' provision in his feeding. So let's ask the question. I'm curious, any thoughts? Why did Jesus ask them to bring their fish? They got there, fish was already on the fire. Why do y'all think Jesus asked them to include their fish? To partner with them? I like that answer. Do we think that he was short? That they came to shore and Jesus was like, oh, I thought it was going to be 2 disciples. It's 5. I don't have enough. Can you bring some of your fish? I don't think that's necessarily the case. Let me ask you this question. If you just cast out a net, you're dragging it to shore, like behind your boat, you can't even pull them in because there's so many fish, and you know it's Jesus, your resurrected Savior, and he says, bring some of those fish, are you going to go, Jesus, you already have some? I wouldn't. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm like unable to haul these fish in and Jesus is like, can you give me a few? I'd be like, yeah, sure. We won't even recognize. We won't even notice the difference. Absolutely. Here, let's take over. Let's give and let's eat. Let's see. We're here. Right. I don't think we would think twice about that contribution. So in the 5,000, this was all that the little boy had. He was giving away his lunch, but he did. And Jesus provided. Yet over here, even though Jesus had already provided, the disciples gave in the excess of what the Lord has provided for them. Let's see this. Once again, after this, how many baskets were left over of what? 12 of what? Of scraps of bread, right? There weren't fish left over, right? Just bread. Right? In chapter 6, verses 26 through 34, if you want to flip there, we're going to read what happens after Jesus fed these people. After there was baskets of bread left over, this mob of people follows him around the lake and starts coming towards him again the next day. And in chapter 6, verses 26 through 34, we get their interaction. They're speaking with him. They're like, we've come from so far. In chapter 26, Jesus answered them, saying, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God, the Father, has set his seal. Then they said to him, what must we do to be doing the works of God? And Jesus answered to them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he has sent. So they said to him, then what sign do you have that we may see and believe in you? What work do you perform? It's a bold question to say after yesterday. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as is written. He gave them bread out of heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. So they said to him, Sir, give us this bread always. If you're not familiar, whenever their ancestors were wandering in the wilderness of the desert after being let out of slavery, every morning they would be provided with food. And God said, take all the baskets of what you're going to eat, but no leftovers. For every morning, you will be provided for of bread. And that's what these people are saying. They're like, all right, you gave us bread yesterday. Where's today's? Right? And they were like, we read stories we have in our day, like every single day you gave bread. Guess what? I'm hungry, and it's the next day. So what miracle are you going to perform for us, mister? Do we get our bread? And Jesus responds to them saying that it wasn't Moses who gave him the bread, but it was God. And this is the bread, verse 33, that God is bringing. It's the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. After this, in verse 35, Jesus responds with one of his 7 I am statements. Do you want to guess which one it is? Yeah, there it is. He says, I am the bread of life. Set it up there for you too. Jesus looks at them and they're like, oh, where's today's bread? Is it going to be there? He says, I am the bread of life. They come to him. So let's fast forward all the way back to John 21. Who provided the bread in this scenario? Jesus. Y'all, I tell you, when I sat at that table with those kids, I read that for the first time ever. I was like, man, the boy provided bread. And then right afterward, Jesus says, hey, I'm not giving you bread every single day because I am the bread. And y'all, what the Lord revealed to me that night, and what I really wanted to share part of it with y'all this morning, is that Jesus is all you need. In the song we sang earlier, there's peace that outlasts darkness and manna for today. And when it's gone, I know you're not, because you are my hope and stay. And I think sometimes when we sing, maybe we don't catch every word, but Jesus is our manna for today. And when we don't have bread, it's the next day we walk around the lake and we're like, hey, Jesus, we're hungry. We know that our Father is not gone. God has not quit providing for us what we need, because Jesus is what we need. Jesus is the bread, and those who believe in him will always have access to it, and we will never hunger. Our fourth thing that I want us to catch from this is what the disciples said in this story, and that is, what is this for so little? If we look at this, right, I mean, this isn't 5,000 little hashes, but I feel like it does the trick of the separation of these two things, right? If you are a believer, God is going to call you to go out and call you to seek, as we see what the disciples did, to go out and catch fish and provide. And who was it? I already messed up one name earlier. We have, oh man, I got to go even higher. I've talked a lot already. I'm almost done. Andrew, right? He goes out and he finds some fish and bread from the kid. He tries. He does the work. But he goes to God and he's like, but it's kind of silly I even brought this. What is this for so many? If God did this with this, well, the Lord spoke to me. What can you do this with this many people? I saw this visual that night for the first time, reading these texts almost side to side through one long story. John wrote this book so that we can see that Jesus is the Lord and that we can have life in him. And y'all, John, the Spirit led him to these stories for this purpose. These fish were not just meant for them. But also, if you notice, they're not given bread anymore. Jesus came with the bread to the party. And he came with some fish. Everything we need is found in the Lord. So those times where you feel like you're working, you're casting your net, you're praying, you're fasting, and you're not getting responses, Jesus isn't upset with you. He didn't call those fishermen and say, why didn't you pray to me first? No, God celebrates our labor. And when we fall short, he is there to fulfill. And whether or not he has fish or we have fish, he is bread and he is all we need, and he provides that. So the last thing I want to say, number 5, and all the Baptists rejoice, is what are you going to do with your extra fish? Yeah. Spoiler alert, you just read my notes. Jesus says, hey, before, when we were walking the earth, we had to seek for other people, and I would provide for what is given. Now I've given you the bread, and heck, I've even given you some fish, but I'm also going to help you catch all this fish. So what are you going to do with it? And man, did that encourage me. It challenged me, but it also really encouraged me. See, right after this breakfast, we get this really popular scripture, and I want to read it too. This may be something that you've heard before, but it's in John chapter 21, and we have Jesus. 15 says, when they finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, and you're all probably familiar, he says, do you love me? And he's like, I do. He says, well, go feed my goats. What's the first time? Feed my lambs. And he says, do you love me? And he says, yes. And he says, tend my sheep. But then in verse 17, I want to read it. He says a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. When I read this, once again, as one little story, not separate from the whole book, I always imagine like that's when the music shifts and you start hearing the trumpets in the background, and as you've got some violins that are crescendoing. I don't know music, but I know that word. And it's like all come together, and he's like, do you love me? And it says, and then he was grieved, and it kind of cuts out. Maybe there's like a little squeaky violin. He's like, but he was grieved because Jesus had to ask him a third time, and he's like, no, don't you know I love you? That's not the background music to this scenario. You know what the background music is? There's 150 fish left in the boat. They get done eating breakfast, and I don't know about y'all, some of you said you fished. My father, whenever he took me fishing, it wasn't this fly fishing, it wasn't this catch and release stuff. We caught fish to eat. We caught catfish. Catfish live for like 30 hours outside of water. So the whole time the rest of your fishing, they're flopping in your 5-gallon bucket making noise, and that's what was happening. They got on this breakfast. Peter's sitting there, and Jesus like, do you love me? He's like, yeah. Go feed my sheep. Do you love me? Go tend my sheep. And a third time, no, do you love me? Take those fish and get out there. Oh man, that meant the world to me. Because 2, it wasn't that I had to know how to get all, I'm not left alone. And like knowing how to fish and knowing how to pray and knowing how to fast to receive how students should be led or how the ministry for our kids should be or what I should say this morning. Like I don't have to do all the work. Jesus will guide and say, hey, cast your net over there. He will help lead me to these fish. And then once I do, he goes, hey, go feed. Go feed. These aren't for you. These aren't for you to sell at market. That's not the purpose of these fish. Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, go and feed my sheep. When we started our series over God's design for us, Corey said this saying, and I love it. He said that we are all, no matter where we lie on any spectrum, on any political or gender or whatever, he said we are all made on purpose and for a purpose. And for every human, that is to see that Jesus is the Lord, have life in him. And once we do, he's going to give us so much fish, y'all. We are made on purpose for a purpose. No matter who you are, Jesus wants to provide bread and fish for you, but he also wants to provide you so much more that you can go and share with others. So as we're closing, we get this like comforting charge of Jesus. Our podcast, I thought it was a fun name. Our podcast name for this is going to be the Heavenly Potluck. And I feel like that's what it is, right? Like Jesus is calling this potluck, and he's got the bread because that's who he is. And he's even got some fish for you. But in this potluck, he's going to guide and provide to you to provide for so many others. So Jesus' charge for us is to go tend to and feed his sheep. And this does require some work on our part. We're going to have to pull that net up. Y'all, that must have been miserable to do. I don't know if y'all have ever tried to like cast net for bait. I've had friends do it where you like hold a net all fancy, you spin and you throw it. total of 153 4 to 6 pound fish, that's a big net. That's a heavy haul when they're fighting to pull back down to the bottom and you're trying to hand pull this up to the top after having fished all night. There is some labor that goes into getting these fish, but Jesus will always guide in the excess. And in the necessity, what do we say in the Lord's Prayer? Give us this day our daily bread. Jesus will always give you your sustenance, what you need to have. He will always be there. He will always provide, and he will guide you into all of the excess, but he calls us to be a part of this heavenly potluck, to bring something to the table, and when we do that, to give to others. So today, Jesus is your bread. So if you know him, if you are in him, if you are celebrating with him, if things are going great, today you got bread. If things are going tough and you feel like you haven't had any fish, you may not have fish, but you've got bread. He will always be there. He is always sustaining. He's always present in that. If today you're just really hungry, I want to encourage you. The book of Matthew tells you that blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So if you're hungry, you're like, man, I feel like I'm starving. I don't have it. And I don't have the Lord, but I want something. I don't know if it's Christianity or whatever. I don't know where I need to find that, but I want something. When you turn your hunger and thirst towards righteousness, Jesus is never like, hey, why have you been casting your net on the wrong side of the boat? No, that's not it. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So if you're today and you're the person who's like, man, I don't have any bread or fish, that sounds cool. Jesus wants to be the bread for you. And he's probably going to start bringing a bunch of fish to the party. And if you today believe in him, know that he is going to guide you to catch some fish. That's what I'm trying to do with y'all, hopefully. Hopefully I have some fish, more than just my Rio Grande cichlids, and I'm able to provide something to y'all. But it's way more than me standing up here on stage. It's way more than that. I can't just do that and that be my provision for what the Lord has given. And it can't be what all God is calling you to do. So I want to encourage you, yet challenge you. God has already brought all of the needs to the heavenly potluck, but he wants you to bring some more fish. And I believe truly that as he provides for you and you have your 153, I don't know how I could be selfish with those 153. But my prayer is that he will guide you and lead you into sharing from what it is he provides for you. And know that if you have no fish, it's okay. The bread is all that you need, and it's all that your neighbor needs, and it's all that your neighbor's neighbor and your coworker, whoever it is around you. If you feel like, I don't have anything to provide yet, ask guidance from the Lord, because he wants us to. But if not, know that you're not letting all of those down around you, because the bread is what they need. You can have no fish and say, hey, I know a guy that has bread, and you've done all of the work for the Lord. But he wants you. His treasures are evermore. He wants you to be able to be there and provide for others.